Welcome to the Right Time Podcast. The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
So I try to get off work as quick as I can so I can get home and watch the NBA draft, right? But I actually wound up with an experience that was a little bit better than watching the NBA draft, and that was listening to the NBA draft on ESPN radio. And I'm being dead serious about this, by the way. Like, if you have never listened to the draft on the radio or consumed the draft on ESPN radio, it's legitimately a great broadcast. The reason is they don't have to worry about all this television stuff, right? Like television, they got to break in and show you all these highlights and stuff like that. On the radio, they're getting in, they're talking about it. Then after that, they're getting the draft picks, right? So like the draft picks are there. They're sitting down. They're doing kind of longer interviews and all this stuff. So, no, I thought it was a really good broadcast. But as I sit down, the homie Mark Stein gets on, and Mark Stein is like, yeah, so there's a big deal that the Timberwolves and the Bulls are working on for Jimmy Butler. And we had Jeff Goodman on the show yesterday, and he's like, I really wouldn't bet on there being a trade with Jimmy Butler and the Bulls because you got to remember Tom Thibodeau and Gar Forman hate each other. But apparently somehow they were able to find enough peace to work it out where Jimmy Butler is going to Minnesota. On the other side, Zach LaVine coming off an ACL tear, Chris Dunn coming off a disappointing rookie season, and the number 7 pick that turned into the dude Markkanen that played for Arizona, who I think was nice, right? Like, I'm not going to pretend like I watched a whole lot of college basketball this year, but I saw him, and I found him to be an impressive player. I actually think that this is kind of a trade that's good for both teams. We'll talk about what happened with the Bulls next segment, but look at that. Minnesota looked up and was just like, all right, got enough kids. All right, we have just enough kids. Now we can go on and move toward the future with a grown-up, except the grown-up is 27 years old, right? Like, it's not as though they went and got an old player to add some experience to the Timberwolves. They went and got a dude in his prime who in a lot of ways seems like the perfect fit for that roster. And what I mean by that is he's a Tibbs guy, right? He is a Tibbs guy. He is a guy with an understanding of what it is to play for Tom Thibodeau. What he also is somebody who's built to handle the grind that comes from playing for Tom Thibodeau. And that, I think, becomes important when you have all these young guys because, look, now you got a grown-up that's going to show you this is the way that we're supposed to do things. So, yeah, Wiggins been in the league, 3 years? Towns been in the league 2 years. I'm sure they got a taste of it, right? I don't think they're ignorant on this matter necessarily. However, Jimmy Butler being in town, okay, boom, now you guys have a star player. Andrew Wiggins one day will probably be a star player. Karl Towns will probably one day be a star player. Jimmy Butler, star player right now. And as you know, he's going to come in and play some defense, right? Like these are things that we know about him. Then you go back and remember Karl Towns' first year in the league. Flip Saunders before he passed away. Who did he sign to bring in to help this team get more grown? Kevin Garnett, right? And we've had Karl Towns on this show, and he talked about it was helpful to have Kevin Garnett there and what he brought to the team. But see, it's one thing to have Kevin Garnett like around age 40 being on the team. It's another for somebody to be bringing a similar type of intensity, not the same, because Jimmy Butler isn't a crazy person and Kevin Garnett is, but that type of intensity and that type of guiding light for your team, yeah, I think you make that move to bring him in if you're Minnesota. And if you're Minnesota, I don't really know if they gave up that much for them. They gave up Zach LaVine, and I think they were trying to style Zach LaVine into a point guard of sorts. I don't know how exactly that was working, but you'd like to have Zach LaVine. You part with Zach LaVine if you're getting back Jimmy Butler, right? Chris Dunn didn't have a good season last year. People were very optimistic about Chris Dunn coming into the season, but didn't have a good season last year. He only got on the floor for 18 minutes a game. He only shot 38% from the floor. I don't think you stop yourself from giving that guy up. And the number 7 pick, like I think that Chicago did well with the number 7 pick, but that's a dude that you get at the number 7 pick. A piece at best. You get a piece. So you're giving up 2 pieces and one guy that we don't even know if he is a piece, and you get back one of the, 12, 15 best players in the NBA? I think you make that trade every time if you're Minnesota. Suddenly, if you're a Minnesota Timberwolves fan, you got a team worth watching, right? Like, not just watching, oh, man, what this is going to be down the line. You got a team worth watching right now. Right? Jimmy Butler, Karl Towns, and Andrew Wiggins, yeah, I'll watch that team. Like, this is a playoff team. Now, I've seen the question raised, does this make Minnesota a contender in the West? Guys, there is one contender in the West. There are not 2 contenders in the West. There is one contender in the West. So, no, this does not make them the Golden State Warriors. But does it make them a playoff team in the West? I mean, I'd say Probably, right? Like, assuming that you're going to get improvement from Wiggins, assuming you're going to get improvement from Karl Anthony Towns, you're adding Jimmy Butler. So the eighth seed last year was Portland. I feel like this team could be as good as Portland was. I mean, be as good as Portland. You think they could be as good as Memphis? I think they could be as good as Memphis. Oklahoma City is there in the 6. Like, I don't know, again, if this makes Minnesota a 50-win team, but I think it definitely puts Minnesota in a place where they win in the 40s. And if you're a Timberwolves fan, you're happy with that, right? All right, when's the last time? Let me go look at this right now in the full list. When's the last time that the Minnesota Timberwolves even got a whiff of mediocrity? Just a taste of mediocrity. Because I don't feel like they've had a great deal of experience with mediocrity.
The Timberwolves have missed the playoffs in 13 straight seasons.
Right. 13. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm talking about just a whiff of the ochre. Okay, 2014, they won 40 games. That's the last time they had a whiff of that ochre. Since then, other than that year they won 40 games, Shannon, not a single season since 2005 where they won more than 33 games. Like, last year was the salad days, basically, of what they've been. Oh, yeah, you get Jimmy Butler, everything changes. Everything changes. Now, Tim Legler of ESPN did SportsCenter the night of the draft, and here's his concern that he has about Jimmy Butler being added to Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns.
This team made 7 threes a game last year. It was last in the NBA. This doesn't address that. Okay, Ricky Rubio is going to score at the rim. Karl Anthony Towns is actually the best three-point shooter of this group. Okay, but he's really a guy that's inside out. I like him better when he's inside more. Wiggins and Butler are mid-range and in and can make an occasional three. But their best 4 players combined last year, Kevin, for 4 made threes a game. Okay, Golden State's 4 best players make about 11 or 12 a night. That's the difference. It's hard to win in the NBA shooting twos and free throws.
I mean, he does make a good point. Now, to be fair, Jimmy Butler's a 37% three-point shooter. Now, it's a possibility that he'll shoot more of them, and we don't know what's going to happen to his percentage. But last year, Jimmy Butler shot 37% from three-point range. Like, I don't think that's anything to apologize for. But I do think he raises a good point. This is not going to be a team to stretch the floor. My thing, though, is that the Timberwolves are not a championship contender now. I don't think anybody would reasonably expect them to be a championship contender next year. If you got a chance to get Jimmy Butler, you get Jimmy Butler. Now, you say their 3 best players make 4 3-pointers a game. Well, Karl Anthony Towns, you just need him to be able to stretch the floor. He's not going to be a guy that's going to be giving you, 4 or 5 made 3-pointers a night. That's not what it's going to be, but you're happy with the fact that he can stretch the floor. Now, do they have a different question they're going to have to ask about Ricky Rubio? Yes. By the way, Ricky Rubio, 26 years old. That's it. Been in the league 8 years. A mere 26 years old. Now, yeah, at some point they're going to have to get a better shooting option at point guard. And who knows, maybe they wind up going and they get themselves a stretch 4. But I don't feel like you wind up with Andrew Wiggins, Jimmy Butler, and Karl Anthony Towns, and I'm focusing too much on what they can't do. Because I don't expect this to be a team that's going to be competing for a championship. This is the step I feel like that you got to take. I think you can find the guys to do the other stuff, like you sprinkle them in. But let's ask this question, though. Philosophy-wise, Thibodeau, he going to be good on the we need to shoot more three-pointer program? Or is he going to be out there on the gritty? He likes it gritty. Gritty. He likes it gritty. By the way, here's Thibodeau right fast talking about how they got Jimmy Butler last night.
As things developed, from the end of the season and then as you're preparing for the draft, you're just looking at all the possibilities. And you could tell by the calls that we were getting regarding our pick that we knew it was a deep draft. And so we wanted to be prepared to move up or move back and also to look at the trade possibilities, who would be available. You saw a number of good players that were becoming available, so you were asking yourself, does this make sense for us? Does the age match up with, your own team? And we have a very young team, and that's what I liked about Jimmy. His age is he's not in his 30s. He's really just entering into his prime. So I thought it would be a good fit for us, and we wanted to take a shot at it. So we were looking at some of the players that we thought were elite, and he certainly fell into that category, and we had the opportunity to do it.
Now again, we told you Tom Thibodeau, who used to work for the Bulls, can't stand Gar Forman, executive for the Bulls. So was this the first trade ever consummated by secretaries? Or excuse me, administrative assistants? Because I feel like they weren't on the phone with one another. Like, how can you consummate a trade when one man has the other man in his phone under do not answer? Or that guy's calling.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
All guests join us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line, just like our next guest. Check him out covering the Bulls on ESPN Chicago. He'll also be filling in on the Right Time a couple of times next week. His name is Nick Friedel. So, Nick, I need you to explain to me how it is that Tom Thibodeau and Gar Forman could ever possibly wind up on a telephone call and doing productive business.
Well, it wasn't Tibbs and Gar, because there is no love lost between those two. That I promise you. I think in the end it was Tibbs and John Paxson. And what you hear over and over the last couple of days is that those two had some conversations in the weeks leading up to the talks when they got really heated, and there was some bad blood for several years between Tibbs and the front office. It's been really well documented, but in the end, those two guys, Tibbs and Pax, they really still respected each other. And I think Tibbs always appreciated that Pax was the one who has been in the NBA life for 20-plus years, first as a player, then as an executive. And Pax always appreciated that Tibbs helped push the Bulls to the level they got with Derrick Rose, with Joakim Noah, and with Jimmy. So I think for those two guys, they came to the reality that they needed each other in order to make this happen, and they found a way to get it done.
Now, why did the Bulls feel like they needed to make this happen?
Because they felt like if they didn't move Jimmy right now, the leverage they have at the moment was going to be gone. They felt like if they didn't do it, they wouldn't get enough value in return. And I've been listening to it all day, going back to last night. I can promise you here in Chicago, there are a lot of fans that don't think they got nearly enough value in return. But to me, Bo, it revolves around this fact for the Bulls. They were never comfortable with Jimmy as the face, with Jimmy as the guy that they were going to build around moving forward. And let's remember, he's still got 2 years left on this deal, which helped them make a move. But in 2 more years, he's going to be eligible for that exception, and that's worth $200+ million over 5 more years, at which point Jimmy will be 30 years old. So in the end, it just wasn't a fit for the organization because they didn't believe that Jimmy was ever going to be the guy that was going to be able to lead them to a title. And they knew that if they kept him, they were going to have to pay him like one of those guys who are able to do it.
We're talking to Nick Friedel of ESPN Chicago, and I'm curious who they think that guy is because I think it raises a fair question about Jimmy Butler, but he is still one of the 10 or 12 best players in the NBA.
Absolutely, and that's the problem for the Bulls is they don't know who that guy is, and that's the reality, and that's why I understand why fans are so upset. They should be, because the front office, what they're doing is they're saying, we want you guys to trust us. And, Bo, with what's happened with going back to the way they handled the Derrick Rose situation and then the Tibbs fallout and then selling Fred Hoiberg as this pace and space guru, except they didn't fill the roster with any pace and space players. You tell the fan base you want to go younger and more athletic, and then you sign Dwayne Wade and Rajon Rondo. I mean, fans have every right to question the moves that they're making. It's just that for the Bulls front office, for Paxson and Foreman, they watched the last couple seasons and they went, we don't want to be sitting here at 500 every year trying to scratch out the 8th seed in the playoffs. So from that perspective, I understand why they did it. Jimmy Butler is a hell of a player, and I think he's still got a couple more years of being one of the game's elite players. But again, to them, Jimmy was never going to be good enough. So what they decided was, we're going to take what we can get now, we're going to hope these draft picks pan out, and then we're going to see where we are in a few more years. And hopefully at that point also, LeBron James is not at the peak of his powers still in the Eastern Conference.
All right, now Chris Dunn was involved in this trade. He was disappointing as a rookie. Is this a case where the Bulls think that they just had the formula with him, or are they just rolling the dice?
It's both. Absolutely, it's both. They believe that he's better than what he showed. But, Bo, anybody who watched him last season knows it wasn't a pretty picture. It didn't look like he can shoot. And when you're 23 years old as a rookie and you can't shoot in this league, it is very difficult to get that skill rolling over the next few years. So I can promise you they still believe in his talent. They know, and just like Tom Thibodeau knows, that he still has it within him to turn his career around. I mean, hell, he's only been in there for a year, but he was a real key piece, and this was the same kind of deal that they were going after last year because they love this guy. So they are banking on not only Levine's need to be healthy after the ACL injury and Markkanen to be the shooter that Doug McDermott and Niko Mirotic were never able to be for this team, but they really believe that Chris Dunn can be the point guard of the future. But I'm laughing to myself thinking about it because they really believe that Cam Payne was ready to come in and play at the trade deadline last year, and Cam Payne looks like he's not even an NBA player at the moment.
Thank you for saying his name, by the way, because I was trying to remember who in the world they got back in that trade. Last segment, I was really sitting here like, damn, who'd the Bulls get? That's right, Cameron Payne was one of the guys that was in that trade. We're talking to Nick Friedell of ESPN.com on The Right Time. Now, with Fred Hoiberg being the coach, I think he's done that job so far to mixed reviews. Did the Bulls do the rare thing in the NBA where they picked the coach over the all-star player?
No, I don't believe this had anything to do with Fred. I think this was more about the fit with Jimmy because as far as Fred goes, if we were popping all these guys with truth serum, the Bulls executives, they tell you that they just haven't really liked the job that Fred has done to this point. He seemed overwhelmed at times. He hasn't developed the younger players the way that they thought he could when they hired him. Now, Bo, I'd argue that the younger players in this case, the Denzel Valentines and Bobby Portises and Tony Snells before he got traded, I just don't think all those guys were that good. Jaren Grant, Michael Carter-Williams, etc. But as far as the Jimmy deal, I don't believe it had anything to do with Fred. It was always about we don't feel that Jimmy's the right match for us. Because, frankly, if Fred doesn't come out and produce a more competitive team in this sense of getting these younger prospects to look better on a nightly basis, I don't believe Fred's going to be here a year from now when you and I are talking. So Fred has to show that he can develop these guys and play the type of offense that they've always wanted to see running up and down the floor. I mean, 2 years into this thing, I don't know what the hell kind of offense they run on a regular basis, and I watch it every day. So I think there's a lot of pressure on Fred, but I don't think that Fred and his future was tied to Jimmy and his in Chicago.
All right, last question for Nick Friedell of ESPN.com. Has anyone talked to Dwayne Wade about all of this?
Nobody has gotten through to Dwayne himself, but at least as far as the Bulls are concerned, Bo, they know that Dwayne is somewhere and he's counting his money because in the end, that is all this was about for Dwayne. And look, at this point in his career, I'm not going to sit there and fault him. He negotiated the deal, he and his agent. The Bulls signed off on it. It's not his fault the Bulls are blowing this thing up, and it's not his fault the Bulls haven't put the right pieces around to make this roster successful. But, I mean, Dwayne talked earlier in the year in January saying, I don't want to go through a rebuild. I want to go where Jimmy goes. I don't want to play with a bunch of 21-year-olds. That was all BS. It was only about the money, and now he's going to have to wear it for at least the next few months before the trade deadline next season.
All right, that's Nick Friedell, ESPN.com, covers the Chicago Bulls. He'll also be filling in on The Right Time a couple of days next week while I'm out. Thanks so much, my man. I appreciate it.
All right, you got it, buddy.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
It's kind of funny. We were just talking during the break about the Bulls getting Chris Dunn and getting Zach LaVine. How many point guards y'all need? Right? So we got Michael Carter-Williams. Which Grant they got?
Jaren.
Okay, so they got him. They now have Chris Dunn. Zach LaVine has flirted at point guard a little bit. Am I missing one?
Cameron Payne.
Oh, yes, they do still have Russell Westbrook's dap partner.
They also have Rajon Rondo.
Okay, that's 6.
And they have Isaiah Cannon.
That's 7. We have 7 point guardish players on the Bulls roster as of right now, and none of us think any of them right now are an NBA point guard.
I do think this ends the LaVine point guard experiment thing.
I mean, it's got to. They got 6 other ones. 6. All right, 888-729-3776. It's up to PJ in Virginia. PJ, thanks for calling the right time.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up a point to you guys, but the guest before Dick Fordell brought it up, you guys forgot to mention D Wade. But I figured having him along with Rondo, along with Robin Lopez, I think with all that experience, they can at least, I don't know, maybe make an A spot in the playoffs. Maybe. I don't think that's far fetched. I think D Wade is a 3-time NBA champion, Finals MVP. I think he carries enough experience to lead this group at least to an A spot in the East, man. It's the weak East. I think they can do that.
I mean, they made the East they 8th slot in the East last year with Jimmy Butler. I don't know how they're going to do it without him. I appreciate the call. I'm also very confused by the people who stayed on hold after somebody else already made their point. I was going to tell y'all forgot D-Wade. Ain't nobody forget D-Wade. We're just going to talk about that later.
Understand how this stuff works. We stretch this stuff out, baby.
Yeah, and shout out to my man Tristan in Virginia Beach who just hung up because he wanted to talk about D-Wade, and we had talked about D-Wade. I guess it probably helps that I went on by saying, why you waiting on hold after we talked about it? He's like, oh, my bad. 888-729-3776. That is our telephone number. I want to switch gears a little bit off all the draft and trade talk because today is the last day that I will be doing work out of sunny, glamorous Miami Beach, Florida. If you saw Highly Questionable yesterday, we did our last episode. Got a little teary, got a little weepy. This is what happens when you work with Dan. See, Dan is a very, open with his emotions type. Not really, right? So, I'm walking up to work the whole way knowing, oh, man, there's going to be crying. And there's going to be crying because Dan is going to be crying. And then they did, a real touching sort of montage of different moments, and we just kind of, said how he felt about the whole time and everything else. And I always joke about living in Miami. That's a trip because it's not the smart thing to do, right? Moving here is not something you do because it's a great idea. It's typically something you do because you think it's going to be fun. For me, it wound up being a career-altering, life-changing sort of thing that was, fantastic and wonderful. But I wanted to talk about something about Highly Questionable as a television show that I found to be very interesting, which is, look, man, we're in the mass production business here. And generally, if you mass produce something, it's hard to get people to have a real emotional sort of attachment to it. I do this radio show now on national radio. I've done local radio and I've done satellite radio before. The hardest thing about doing it nationally is to get that emotional connection with the audience because we're trying to send it out to so many people. It's just not an easy thing to do. I was so blown away by how many people yesterday were sending me things saying how that last episode with me on Highly Questionable was a really touching thing and talking about how they were getting text messages sent back and forth with their parents and talking about watching it with their children and everything. And I am sincerely proud to have been associated with a program that even if it's only 5 people that loved it, but people who seem to really love it and in large part seem to love it because they felt a connection to the connection that I had with the people that I was on television with, And so if you have shared in what we did in that way, right? If you've experienced it with that degree of intimacy that's close to the intimacy that we had in putting the show together, I thank you for giving us that little piece of yourself, right? It's not something that you couldn't take back necessarily, but you lent something to us, right? You lent that level of comfort that you had, and you gave us your time and attention. And I personally appreciate that in a really deep and serious way. And I mentioned this on television when we talked about this yesterday on the last episode I did on Highly Questionable. This is something I think is very important. And I say a thank you to Dan Le Batard. And I think that seems to be an obvious point for people to say, right? Because, you look at Dan as being kind of the boss of these surroundings, and then you got on. And so it's oh, thank you for that. No, man, it's really not quite that simple. You got to stop and think about this, man. I've worked in television or media for a very, very long time, and it's a very, very territorial business. That television show was called Dan Le Batard is Highly Questionable. I show up one day, they pull up a chair, and that TV show is then called Highly Questionable. There aren't that many people that are taking their own names off the marquee and giving up what was theirs and turning it into something that, for me, became ours. There just aren't that many people who are going to do that. And in large part, Dan did that in large part because he felt like I had a level of talent that this industry was not showing the proper level of respect to, and he had his beliefs on why that was. And this is a dude that had a platform and extended part of that platform to me. and shared in it because he felt that I was a person who should have received that kind of opportunity, and he thought that with that, everything would be good. And then after that, man, we did a lot of winning, man. Dan did a lot of winning. I did a lot of winning. And for somebody who never had a job for 2 consecutive years, those were the best 4 professional years that I have ever had. I thank him. I thank you. And we move on to what's next.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Oh, man, Paul George, still an Indiana Pacer. Still an Indiana Pacer. They're in a bad one now because everybody knows that Paul George is not going to be an Indiana Pacer for very long. Everybody knows that Paul George does not want to be an Indiana Pacer very long. He is about to be dialing up one of them cases of what they call that senioritis. Yeah. It's about to be that senioritis. Like, that's coming. Everybody knows that senioritis.
That senioritis, you're there in person, but mentally and spirit, you're long gone.
The thing is, even if you like it, right? Like, even if you enjoy what it is that you're doing, when that senioritis comes, I mean, you're talking to somebody who is ending his senioritis today. You know what I'm saying? Like, I had a nice long bout of senioritis. It was like senioritis, but you didn't know when the last day of school was. Like, you imagine that. That's where Paul George is right now. He is dealing with senioritis, but does not know when the last day of school is. That seems like it's going to be a bad situation, especially when the general manager of your franchise is talking like Kevin Pritchard, the man in charge of the Indiana Pacers, is talking right now. Here's what he said about Paul George letting them know that he would leave and be a free agent in 2018, and I quote, "It couldn't have come at a worse time. If we would have known this a few months ago, I think we could have been more prepared. Becoming public was an issue. The draft came and went without the Pacers of obviously coming up with a trade." Here's the only thing, though. You guys help me out here. If I knew Paul George was trying to get up out of there, and if you knew that Paul George was trying to get up out of there, how the only person that apparently did not know that Paul George was trying to get up out of there, Kevin Pritchard. How did Kevin Pritchard not see when Larry Bird was like, nah, I'm going to fall back, but apparently still comes to work? How was that not his sign? Like, maybe this isn't, maybe something's about to. Everybody knew but him. Everybody knew. People have been talking about this Paul George thing going back to the All-Star break. Everybody knew but him. I saw Bruce Bowen at the All-Star game this year, and we were talking about Paul George wanting to go to the Lakers then. That was 4 months ago. How did you not know? And so now they're doing that thing that teams do. Oh, man, it went public. Kevin, everybody knew this, man. Everybody knew this. Like, I have a hard time believing that NBA general managers are like, well, hold on. Now it's different because it's in the paper. You know what I mean? It's in the newspaper now. Now everything's changed. Everything's going to hit. Nah, bro, that's no. He was going to be gone. It became incumbent upon you to find a way to move him at this point, right? Now, maybe it was just a matter of the Pacers thinking, okay, no, we'll get him to stay after this. We'll convince him, whatever it is. With what? With what? Paul George said at that softball game a few days ago, I am an Indiana Pacer and I am under contract. What did that night tell you? Everybody already knew this. So what the Pacers needed to do, whether they liked it or not, if they had to take a below-market deal, they had to take a below-market deal. What did we talk about a little bit earlier where I say trade, there aren't really winners and losers in trades. Sometimes you realize you got to move something and you just got to take what you can get for it. Because I felt like the Pacers needed to be on the phone with people during the draft, and if you had to go here, this is where they had to go, right? Where you ask somebody, hey, we got Paul George, what do you give us? And you're like, I don't know. Well, look, man, what you got right now? What you got right now? What you got on you right now? Right? I don't need no checks. I don't need no IOUs. Just tell me what you got on you right now. Get what you can get right now.
You get that watch from? All right, yeah, throw that in there too.
Yeah,
we're good.
yeah, right now. Yeah, I'll take that. That'll work. That's good. I mean, that's just, it's an unfortunate situation that they wound up in, but I do think this happens a lot of times in basketball where you just look around and you make this decision. Like, I'm going to lose him. Let me get back what I can. And I don't know what exactly they could get back for Paul George, but you got to get back what you can.
A couple of things working against the Pacers here. One, everyone knows that Paul George wanted to go to L.A. That's the big one. So everybody knew. So teams were hesitant to give to trade a lot if they knew they were only renting him. So that's one. And then, like I said, his impending free agency was another thing. So it's all a rental, and you knew it was going to be a rental unless you were the Lakers.
Yep.
So you were unwilling. So they're already behind the 8 ball to start because the teams were unwilling to give up that much because they knew it would only be a rental.
Yep. But everybody knew it already. Like, how many times have we been talking about Paul George as a rental before Kevin Pritchard finally understood that Paul George was going to be a rental for somebody? Like, is that just the arrogance of front offices that they hadn't seen this? What I wonder about NBA front offices, though, is why more teams have not learned from the Utah Jazz and what they did with Deron Williams, where you just looked up one day and Deron Williams was gone, right? Like, they just wound up on a call with the Nets, and the Nets were like, how about we give you Derek Favors and a number 1 pick? And they're like, yeah, we'll do that. Boom. Done. Trade. All the drama. Avoided. Right? Like, all of that gone. If you got a guy coming up on his second extension and you're not sure if he's going to come back, he ain't coming back. It's simple as that. Like, think about this. Chris Bosh, LeBron, and Dwayne Wade, their second extensions all ended at the same time, right? The Cavs didn't know if LeBron was going to come back. He didn't come back. Toronto didn't know if Chris Bosh was going to come back. He did not come back. Miami never thought for a second that Dwayne Wade was going to leave. Never did. Like, they knew their guy was going to stay, and their guy wound up being the one to stay. If you got an inkling that this dude might not stick around, you need to start working the phones sometime before there's 1 year left on his contract. Because these new teams, nobody wants a rental, but I think those teams are going to feel like, look, if we get a dude in here for a year and a half, 2 years, give him a chance to like it, give us a chance to, like, show that we got a good direction going with the franchise, and then we'll be able to pay this guy more money than anybody else is able to pay this dude, and then we got a chance to keep him. And that's what happened with the Nets. Now, you can make the argument that the Nets would have been better off if they had not kept Deron Williams, but the plan remains in place. And so I get it if you're in a situation like, say, the Cavs were with LeBron in 2009, 2010. You're like, look, we got a chance at a championship. We're going to max out the chance at a championship. I would say the same thing with Oklahoma City and Kevin Durant. Look, we have a chance at a championship. We're going to max out our chance at a championship. Yes, that's the way that you need to go about it. But if you're at a place where Indiana was with Paul George, you're not going to be a championship contender anytime soon. You're not in a place where anybody wants to sign there as a free agent. Jeff Teague is from there. He's probably about to deuce out as a free agent. Y'all probably should have thought about trading Paul George sooner. You probably should have. Instead, you get to the quote-unquote end, and it felt like a gut punch. You hear me say that? It felt like a gut punch. I mean, I understand it felt like a gut punch, but I understand that all gut punches feel bad, but say it all the way. It felt like a gut punch where the dude told me, put your hands over your head, I'm about to punch you in the gut. Right? Like it was not a sucker punch. It was just a gut punch. He told you it was coming. And you were like, all right, cool, I'm going to just stand here. At which point, I don't really feel that bad for you, right? One thing about it in my world, if you get punked, my problem is with the person who got punked. All right, 888-729-3776. That's our telephone number. Hit the phone. Talk to Mike in Alabama. Mike, thanks for calling the right time.
What's going on, Bomani?
Doing all right.
So I feel like we're going to be talking about this Paul George thing for a little while, because since it didn't happen before the draft, I don't think it's going to happen until after free agency, when everybody kind of figures out what they can get. What I'm excited to see is what can happen in Los Angeles once this does happen, because they're obviously really big on trying to get this guy. I appreciate Paul letting Indiana know this far ahead of time, hey, I do want to leave, because one thing I don't think we've talked about a lot, I heard you talk about a lot, is a lot of these guys these days won't let you know until right there before the trade deadline, hey, by the way, I'm not re-signing. Paul's not doing that, so that's great. But could you imagine L.A. giving up just about everything but Lonzo at this point and saying, hey, Paul George, come on over, especially with the free agent market like it is? I mean, L.A., I feel like they're about to throw a few max contracts out this year, and not be afraid to do it. Try and get somebody like a Blake Griffin from the Clippers. Nobody's talked about him staying there much longer. I don't see that happening. If he does stay in L.A., I see it with being with the Lakers. I honestly think Griffin a couple of years from now is going to be an Oklahoma City Thunder member myself. But could you imagine Paul George, Lonzo, Blake Griffin? I could see them getting one more guy over there, max contract, maybe go after Gordon Hayward this offseason, throw that kind of big four together, and then people will stop talking about the Timberwolves being the big thing in the West going up against the Warriors.
Well, I tell you this, Mike, and I appreciate the call. The Lakers are going to throw max contracts out, but it ain't going to be this year. It's going to be next year. Like, you talk about maybe they can get Gordon Hayward, or maybe they could get LeBron James. Right? Like, that's where this is going to be. Or maybe they can get LeBron James. So I don't even know how much they're going to have to throw at the Pacers in order to get Paul George. But I do think Paul George will be there. And then it gets interesting because, man, let me tell you, as much as you don't want the West to get overloaded, you want the Lakers to be good. Also, by the way, the West not looking indomitable next year as people make it out to be. Like right now, the Warriors are really messing up the balance of things when we talk about the West. But Shannon, we were just talking about this a second ago. It's a lot of question marks over there in the West, huh?
Aside from the Warriors, and you'd imagine that Houston's going to be good again, but San Antonio, they have question marks. The only guarantee they have right now is Kawhi. Because there have been talks that they're trying to move LaMarcus Aldridge.
And he's a question mark if you keep him.
He's a question mark if you keep him. Powell, you don't know what you're going to get back from him. Tony Parker's towards the end. Ginobili's at the end. You don't know what the Spurs are going to be next year.
Right. And the Rockets don't play defense.
Right.
The Jazz were the 4 seed, right?
Yeah.
The Clippers may be exploding all in this offseason.
The Grizzlies have guys that are free agents, including Zebo.
The Thunder's a one-man team.
And then Portland was the 8th seed.
Right. Let me tell you this. That's why the Denver Nuggets are looking around, and they made that trade yesterday. They're like, yo, man, we got a chance to shoot up.
Yeah, the Nuggets missed the playoffs by 1 game.
And you look at what's going on above them. Hey, man, the West may be better than the East, but the West is not just a bunch of Titans.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
We just talked about the Paul George situation in Indiana. Kevin Pritchard felt like he got punched in the gut. I mean, it wasn't like nobody surprised him. The guy told you, hey, man, I'm going to punch you in the gut. I mean, he didn't come out and say that. But when the dude started balling up his fist and looking at your stomach, what do you think it was about to be? 888-729-3776. Let's talk to John in New Jersey. John, thanks for calling The Right Time.
Hey, Bomani, how you doing?
Doing all right, man.
Honestly, man, I really think it's time these GMs start acting like hurt girlfriends. I really do. Because, first of all, he told you what he's going to do. He's actually giving your organization time to put a plan B or C in motion. Unlike Kevin Durant, who gave Golden State no time. They got nothing back for him. At least they can get something back for him. And also what I want to say, Bomani, is I think the real problem is the fact that now the power is in the players' hands in terms of where they want to go. Because if the executives were making these decisions, they'd be getting all kinds of Executive of the Year awards. But now that the players have this say-so, now everybody want to act like hurt girlfriends who got stood up at the prom. That's all I want to say, Bomani.
Well, I will say this, and I appreciate the call. One thing about it is this segment is basically entitled, It's All Business Until Your Feelings Get Hurt, right? And that's how just about everybody is. Hey, it's just business until your feelings get hurt. Then it's, come on, man, I thought we had something. The other thing I would like to note, and this is a very important point because people like to make analogies like hurt girlfriend, like my man said right there, and I'm not going to go over the top about that, but always remember this. You tell jokes about the things that hurt girlfriends do. Hurt boyfriends kill people. Like, seriously. Like, really, when you stop and think about that, ask women how afraid they are on a consistent basis about what will happen if some dude gets his feelings hurt. We don't ha about that on the radio. All right, 888-729-3776. That is our telephone number. So, LeVar Ball's son, Lonzo. Sorry, guys, I forgot which Ball I was going to talk about. Anyway, LeVar Ball drafted by the Lakers. Well, we had Jeff Goodman talk to LeVar Ball yesterday during the draft. Here is that 1 minute and 3 seconds.
LeVar, you already got the Lakers hat.
I'm trying to tell you, I knew this was happening before it was happening.
When did you get this hat made?
When he was a baby.
What's it like now that this has come to fruition for you? You've been talking about it for 9 months.
9 months? You're talking about 19, 20 years.
All right, 19, 20 years.
You had a microphone on me when I was talking about it.
What's it like right now that he is an L.A. Laker?
It's a wonderful feeling. But I already knew what was coming to him. I got 2 more boys. I got to come do the same thing 2 more years.
So you're going to get them to the Lakers too. How?
The big baller way. Ball control.
Philly is starving for
How good is Lonzo Ball going to be for the L.A. Lakers?
Hey, I'm going to tell you what. Lonzo Ball is going to take the Lakers to the playoffs his first year. Come see me when he does. I have another hat on to say I told you so.
Thanks a lot, LeVar. Congrats.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's rechart some things that happened with LeVar at the draft last night. That happened. LeVar also got booed at the draft. LeVar also walked past the crowd with his Big Baller Brand baseball cap on and threw it into the crowd. And if you think people weren't trying to get that hat, you are mistaken.
Yes.
Like, say what you want about LeVar, right? Say what you want. People, Shady, you saw the clip, right? Them people were jumping on top of each other trying to get a hold of LeVar's hat sweat.
Absolutely. Ball control.
Ball control. Here's the thing, though. I don't know what y'all going to do with LeVar now, because LeVar believes that you can speak things into existence, right? Like, he's that guy. He believes that you can speak things into existence. And I understand that sounds crazy to a lot of y'all. To be honest, it sounds a little bit crazy to me, but I know a lot of people who believe this to be the case. So, like, hearing it from LeVar is not that surprising. That being said, this is a dude who believes that he can speak things into existence, and he said that his son was going to play for the Lakers, and then a lottery pick that the Lakers were not guaranteed to keep wound up falling at number 2, and his son wound up getting drafted by the Lakers after they said they didn't even really want to work out for nobody else. They did work out for the Sixers, I believe it was. LeVar believes that he's the one who made this happen, right? He the one that gave that Y chromosome. He the one that helped that boy play all this basketball to get good enough to get drafted number 2, and he believes that he the one who rigged the lottery to get the Lakers that pick, right? That's right, Shady. He's sitting there putting that finger to his forehead right now.
Look, Lonzo wears what jersey number? Number 2.
Oh.
What pick did the Lakers have?
Oh.
2nd overall.
Oh.
He's spoken into existence.
Dude, like, and the key is that he thinks that he has. Regardless whether or not you agree, he believes that he can speak things into happening. If he believes that he spoke his son into playing for the Lakers, he is never going to stop speaking. Like, you need to understand that. He is never going to stop speaking. Now, to be fair, he's going to be out here speaking, like, positive things, right? So you think he's going to speak the Lakers into the finals or whatever it is. But what in the world is going to happen if the Lakers make the playoffs this year like he says they would? What is going to happen if the Lakers make the playoffs like LeVar said he would? I ain't going to lie. You think he can speak me a raise? Like, I feel like the Players Association need to get LeVar on the payroll if he's speaking things into happening. Like, hey, LeVar, can you speak the max contract off the books? Please, LeVar? How about that? Hey, could you speak a trade for Paul George and a conditional second-round pick? Since you are doing this. Hey, man, he thinks he can do it. He thinks he can do it. 888-729-3776. Talk to John in Las Vegas. John, thanks for calling the right time.
Hey, Bomani, I love your show, brother.
Thank you, man.
Hey, and this is not directed to you, because you never really gave LeVar a hard time. You just use him for entertainment value. But did you notice how many African-American kids thank their mother for working so hard because their dad wasn't around? And then you got a man out there, the worst thing we can say about him is he's just trying to build a brand. And so many people from ESPN, not you, but I know on the weekend, the girls and all them on there, they got such a hard time trying to go into his psyche, play all psychologists on him. But think about that. All those African-American kids, a lot of them, 90% of them didn't have a father around, and they thank their mother for working so hard, raising all their brothers and sisters. And then you got this man up there, and all he doing is speaking, like you said, and pushing his son to be great. And all we want to do is compare him to Michael Jackson's dad and Serena Williams' dad and Tiger Woods' dad. And guess what? They made successful kids.
Well, let me say this, though, right fast, and I appreciate the phone call. One, saying that 90% of these kids didn't have their fathers around is kind of like racist. Like, it really is. But I do think it's funny. Everybody say they want more fathers. These basketball coaches always talk about the problems with recruiting these boys who don't got fathers in the home. Then they get the father and be like, damn, I wish you was a deadbeat. I'm so tired of putting up with you.
Okay, Kevin, for the grand prize of $1 million, what color is the White House?
I know this.
5 seconds.
Oh, switching to Geico could save you a bunch of money on car insurance?
Okay. Judges? That's true, Kevin. They'll allow it. Congratulations. You're a winner.
Woo!
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
All guests join us on the Shell Pinto Performance Line, just like our next guest. Your boys all over the place on television. Catch him on The Jump. Catch him on Sports Nation. Catch him on the Lebatard Show. His name is Amin El Hassan. Amin, we were just talking about Kevin Pritchard saying that Paul George gave him a gut punch. What do you think hearing Kevin Pritchard say that Paul George said he's ready to leave as a gut punch?
Well, first of all, to hear Brian Windhurst tell it, because he was the one, he was listening to it while it was happening. He told me he used the word gut punch like 7 times. Afterward, it just got ridiculous. No, I feel like there's a lot of subterfuge going on here. Because there's no way Kevin Pritchard woke up last week or whenever that report came out and said, you don't want to be here? You're thinking about leaving? What? Like, that can't be true. And if so, then Kevin Pritchard is probably doing a very poor job at being a general manager of a team or a team exec of any sort. And he's not that kind of guy. So this is the kind of thing that you do, because all of this is framing, right? It's all about framing who's the villain. He's the villain. He's the one that has rejected you, Indiana, and not us. We thought we were a match made in heaven and all that. Much like him coming out, him being Paul George a week earlier and saying, I want to remain a Pacer, but we need to get better players. That's his way of saying, yeah, they're not going to get better players, so I'm leaving. But you say, well, I said I wanted to stay. So all of this is kind of framing the way history will be written when he ends up leaving eventually.
Now, you've worked in the NBA. You worked in the front office with the Phoenix Suns. Now, I think you can help give people an understanding of this. After we, the public, find out about something, how long has the NBA world known about it?
Well, it depends. Are you talking about like that Paul George wants out, for instance?
Yes.
Something. A lot of times we've known a lot for a long time. You've known that for a while. Sometimes some people know and some people have no idea. So it's not kind of a universal knowledge that everybody in the league knows it. Sometimes people find out a little later than others, but it is very rare, and it is. I mean, you usually can tell the moments where everyone is shocked. So I'm trying to think the last time where no one saw that coming.
Like the Darren Williams trade, for example.
Yes, that one. That was aggressive. Darren Williams get traded from Utah to Brooklyn. That one shocked everyone to the point where there were a lot of teams saying, well, if we had known he was available, we would have offered. It's like it's one of those things that when you call, because this is how trades work most of the time. You're usually calling teams all throughout the year and say, who do you like on my team, right? And you kind of like, well, I like so-and-so on your team, so-and-so, or whatever. But no one's calling Cleveland and say, what do you want for LeBron? Or I should say, there's always that one GM who does that kind of thing, and everyone like, he's a jerk, you don't answer his calls anymore, right? But for the most part, you don't call about LeBron, you don't call about Steph Curry, you don't call – because you get it, like, okay, that's a franchise guy. Darren Williams was that. And so when he got traded, that one was one that legitimately caught everybody by surprise. But for the most part, people have all had conversations with every team about most players, and you kind of get a feel for what is the rumbling out there.
All right, we're talking to Amin Elhassan of ESPN. So for the Pacers, like my thought was they needed to do this before the draft. Like, how bad do you think this could get with him being there during the regular season with everybody knowing he wants to leave?
Well, I don't think – first of all, I don't think he's going to start the regular season as an Indiana Pacer. I think he'll be gone before then. I think we're going to see a lot of these offers start to pick up if it passes July 1, because then his salary goes up, and so you can then send more players presumably to fit that salary slot, that cap hit. But I don't see them letting this linger into the season. It's not that type of thing. He's a great player, and every additional day that passes, if you're a receiving team, you're like, I'm not going to give up that much because that's one less day I have with them for sure, right? The idea here is that whoever gets them, if they're not the Lakers, you're getting them with the presumption that between now and June 30th, 2018, I'm going to prove to you that being here is so awesome that, yeah, you want to be a Laker today, but by June 30th, 2018, like, no, this is where I want to spend the rest of my career. That's what Boston is trying to do. That's what the Cavs are trying to do. That's what maybe the Miami Heat are trying to do. They're trying to show you, by the time you get here, you're going to love it. You won't want to go back. So every day that passes is one less day for you to prove that to him, and is one day closer to him just going to the Lakers as a free agent.
All right, we're talking to Amin Elhassan of ESPN. Switching gears, what do you think about the Jimmy Butler trade?
I thought Minnesota made out like bandits.
Really?
Bandits, Bo. Here's the thing. You're Minnesota. First of all, we all know that Tibbs thought he was going to come in and change the core. They had a nice young core. He was going to change everything, and they will be at least a 500 team. That failed miserably, right? So coach is president of the team, expecting success, doesn't get it. There's pressure there because he doesn't think like a general manager. He thinks like a coach. Get me more players. Get me better players now. Then you got a guy in Jimmy Butler who he loves to death, right, as so close, exemplifies the culture that he wants to build. And say, oh, that's the guy that I want. So then you got more urgency there, right? So, and you're done with this whole youth movement. He said, I need old vets that know how to play, or vets, the older players who know how to play. So there's that sense of urgency. If you're Chicago, you're sitting there, so they got all this urgency on their side. Jimmy Butler's under contract for 2 more years and a player option after that. I have no rush. Why am I accepting this paltry deal as the return? Better yet, why am I throwing a first-round pick in there? Why am I giving them the 16? What is it? They just said they don't want young players. So why am I giving them the 16 pick along with Jimmy Butler, who's the best player in this deal? I thought Chicago got fleeced, to be honest. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have traded Jimmy Butler. I get it. That's how the way this league works. But they could have done better, specifically with Minnesota. Forget about could they have done better with another trade partner.
Now, see, it's interesting to me because I felt like for the Bulls, even though apparently they have more, like half the roster is point guards right now. But my thought was if you make this trade, LaVine is going to be a restricted free agent next year. You get to figure out what you're going to do with him. And I guess they still think they have something with Chris Dunn. And I like the marketing kid. Like, I thought they got a halfway decent haul.
No, I didn't. Chris Dunn was one of the worst rookies last year. Doesn't matter where he was drafted. Again, this is a real-time information league. So even if you think, oh, Chris Dunn could be pretty good, you got to sit there in that negotiation room and say, well, he was terrible last year. It looks like he was an awful pick. You guys messed up. If you love him so much, why are you trying to lump him in here? So you kind of almost have to bash the kid in the negotiation because that's where your leverage is. Again, there is no sense of urgency for Chicago to do this deal right now. You could have waited till next week. You could wait till next month. You could wait a year from now, and he'd still have great trade value. It's very different from the Paul George scenario where Indiana is against the clock. So there's that going on. The other thing that's going on, again, is the idea that Tibbs specifically, you got to rake him over the coals. Anytime you're dealing with a coach who's in charge of the organization, you have to rake him over the coals because at the end of the day, they don't think like general managers. They all think like coaches, and coaches say, just get it done. Just get him in the building. So what if we don't get the 16 pick? That's how coaches think. That was the button they had to press, and they didn't do it.
Amin Al-Hassan, gifted at Spotting the Mark, and a great guest here on The Right Time. Well, man, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bo.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones.
Stephen A. Smith has a radio show on ESPN Radio that airs from 1 to 3 Eastern. And apparently, Stephen A. was all hopped up to come on the radio. Not just come on the radio, but while on the radio, he said he'd heard something. And he was like, okay, now I am able to tell you what I heard. Now, there's a difference between reporting and hearing, but this is what Stephen A. Smith had to say that he heard. And just so you know, it gets a little loud.
The New York Knicks were involved in a mega 5-team deal that would have sent Carmelo Anthony and Paul George to Cleveland, both of them. And what nixed it up was A, Melo's hesitancy, and B, more importantly, nobody wanted to take Kevin Love's money. Now, I knew about this, but I had to make sure I had permission to say it, and I just received permission to say it. Melo and Paul George was going to end up in Cleveland, both of them. But the combination of Griffin getting fired, along with Love's contract nobody wants, because I've been telling y'all for months the knee and the back have been issues with Kevin Love, the deal didn't happen.
Whoa. Shannon, how you feel, man?
I mean, as a Knicks fan, yeah, it would have been something to see Melo go, but I just feel cheated that we're not going to get a Melo and Paul George in Cleveland.
And LeBron.
Oh, yeah, that's
I mean, let's not forget that. I mean, so here's my thing about, like, what I hear there. On one hand, I'm disappointed because it would have been interesting to see that as the Cleveland Cavaliers. On the other hand, I'm just disappointed I didn't get to come on the radio and talk about that. Can you imagine how crazy that would be for everybody in this business if there were a 5-team trade that involved Carmelo Anthony, Kevin Love, and Paul George? And we don't even know who else, because I'm guessing Phoenix would have had to have been involved in that, because everybody was going to Phoenix to get that number 4 pick to see what they could pull off, because Phoenix felt like they got enough down there where they might be a couple, like the right people come in there, they're in a turn the corner situation, right? And basically, a lot of teams were like, yo, you got to go somewhere to get picks. And Phoenix was the most reliable choice that folks had when they were looking to find somebody that had picks. So, hold on. No. I mean, play that one more time. I just want to make sure that people heard this about this 5-team trade. And just think of how excited you get just hearing about it.
The New York Knicks were involved in a mega 5-team deal that would have sent Carmelo Anthony and Paul George to Cleveland. Both of them. And what nixed it up was A, Melo's hesitancy, and B, more importantly, nobody wanted to take Kevin Love's money. Now, I knew about this, but I had to make sure I had permission to say it. And I just received permission to say it. Melo and Paul George was going to end up in Cleveland. Both of them. But the combination of Griffin getting fired, along with Love's contract nobody wants, because I've been telling y'all for months, the knee and the back have been issues with Kevin Love. The deal didn't happen.
Yo, like, how many days of content could we have gotten out of that? Like, if that was like, that would be all we talked about that day if such a thing would ever happen, right? Like, you think about that shit. We do 3 hours of radio. We would have had to stay an extra hour, right?
Bonus coverage.
I got to be like, Jalen Jacoby, take the night off, fellas. I'll stay till 9. Okay, I would never say that. Also, Stephen A., because, Stephen A. was just like, yo, man, I can finally tell you these things I've been hearing. How long has Stephen A. just been, like, has he just been ready to explode? Because I don't know how long I could have sat on this, right? Like, I'm impressed by the fact that he didn't tell us already. Like, Shannon, I tell that story about the whole ship. I can't tell the whole ship story on this radio, but I tell a story about the whole ship. I told my homeboy who told me the whole ship story, like, 2 years later, I was like, look, man, I told a story on the radio. And he goes, you know what? You waited 2 years. I can't believe you waited that long. That's how I feel that Stephen A., I'm impressed that he waited this long. But hold up. Stephen A. had heard and told us what he heard, which is not the same thing as reporting, but his is something else that he had heard.
Melo and George was one trade. Guess who the San Antonio Spurs called? The New York Knicks. And said they were willing to move Kawhi Leonard and clean house. But then they stepped back from it and changed their minds. These are all the things that I knew over the last couple of days. I couldn't say it. Couldn't say it. But I got it confirmed just a few minutes ago. Yet again, things are getting very, very interesting.
Okay. If that were true, right? If that were the case, is that not a fascinating window, or would that not be a fascinating window into how the Spurs view the roster that they have right now? Right? Like, if they were to look and say, all right, let's get Kawhi out of here, and then let's figure it out from there. Because I'm assuming Porzingis was going to be involved in this if they were going to do that. Like, you can't trade Kawhi to the Knicks unless you're getting back Porzingis. By the way, Kawhi, silent superstar in New York City. Interesting match. Is he at once? Could he possibly, though, be the perfect New York superstar because it'll never be a thing? And you can never make it a thing? Because he's just going to be like, yes, no.
And he's only 25.
He's only 25.
In his prime.
Not even at the prime. We're approaching prime, Shannon. You would have put a stamp on Porzingis to get him?
Absolutely. Next day, whatever you need, I'll take it there myself.
But I say, I will hitch up a trailer if I've got to and pull this thing.
It would have worked for both squads, especially if San Antonio's in the rebuild, complete rebuild in New York. As we know, not the most patient place in the world. And you get a ready-made star right now who plays both ways. Oh,
I am fascinated, though, by the idea that maybe the Spurs are looking at what they got, and they're like, nah, man, this ain't going to cut it. Right? Like, maybe, like, if that were the case, like, nah, man, this ain't. Keeping in mind, again, that we're hearing about the Spurs being in there on Chris Paul. By the way, we are at my favorite time of breaking news, by the way, where you're going to see a lot on SportsCenter at the bottom of the screen. Breaking news, NBA players aren't morons, which is Blake Griffin outside of his contract. Hey, Chris Paul outside of his contract. Breaking news. Breaking news.
Can we go back really quickly to the trade, the first trade, the proposed 5-team trade that Cleveland would have landed Paul George and Melo?
Yes.
Wow. So does Melo start in that situation?
I think Melo comes off the bench.
Really?
I think Melo has to come off the bench. He doesn't play enough defense. Paul George comes off the bench. I mean, Paul George starts. LeBron starts. Tristan Thompson, I guess, next to him. Also, by the way, that Kevin Love thing, the thing that Stephen A. pointed out is something I'd heard before, too. The big concern that people have about Kevin Love is they don't think that he can physically hold up. Like, that's the big one. Like, people feel like he's damaged goods already at age 28. But yeah, Shannon, your Knicks might have been involved in some big-time stuff. Instead, they still the Knicks.
Got Frank.
Frank. Y'all got Frank.
Thanks for listening to the Right Time Podcast. Please come back Monday for more. And don't forget to listen to The Right Time with Bomani Jones from 4 p.m. to 7 Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.